Mark Rogers TV talking Ohio State football with Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry each and every Wednesday night. We are getting you set for spring practice, taking each and every positional unit as it comes. We've talked the wide receivers. Now we look at the running backs. Of course, Mike Weber had a fine season, but faltered to a certain extent down the stretch. Not necessarily his fault. The competition was rugged in Michigan and Clemson and their defensive fronts, and not given the opportunity necessarily in those games. Obviously, Brandon, there was a drop-off. We're talking about Zeke Elliott, so this is no knock on Mike Weber. He's a fine back, and we expect him to get much better. And as a freshman, carrying the load at tailback for Ohio State is a lot to ask, and he proved to be up to the challenge despite following one of the great running backs in the history of the school.
Yeah, it really has to be tough to be a freshman to follow up someone like Zeke and Carlos Hyde back before him. So there's a long line of just really good running backs coming through the Buckeyes right now. Mike Weber, I thought, stepped up to the challenge last year. I was not as big of a Mike Weber fan going into last year as most people seem to be. But I actually became a real big fan as the season went on. I mean, finished with over 1,000 yards, over 6 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. It's not a dominant, Carlos Hyde or Zeke type of year. But for a freshman, I think it was good. But as you mentioned, it kind of changed down the stretch. You could really tell that the coaching staff was not as confident in Mike Weber as maybe they would have been if Zeke was back there or something. Against Michigan State, he really didn't have too many carries. Against Michigan, he really did not get too many carries. Against Clemson, as everyone knows, he didn't really get his first carry, I believe, until it was about 2 minutes left in the second quarter. So as it got down to the end, as you mentioned, as competition got better, Mike Weber's carries definitely dropped. They relied more on JT Barrett running, a lot more on Curtis Samuel running the ball. So it's going to be a lot of going into his redshirt sophomore year if the coaching staff can keep on building that confidence with Mike Weber and just see how it goes this year. I think running back is one of the spots where I think they're pretty set next year. They don't really have to worry about it. Mike Weber's going to do his thing. He's going to rush for 1,000+ yards. It's more about how the running game changes with Kevin Wilson coming in to see how many opportunities Mike Weber gets. You don't have that Curtis Samuel kind of safety valve there. So it's going to be a lot of Mike Weber and still JT Barrett, which I'm sure going into spring practice again, we will hear Urban Meyer say they don't want JT Barrett to run the ball as much as he did the year prior. And then we'll get into this year and he'll still run the ball just as much. So it seems how it always works out.
Yeah, Damario McCall is a guy that we mentioned in our previous segment talking about the wide receiver core of possibly filling that H-back position left vacant by Curtis Samuel. Damario McCall only played in 5 games, only had substantial action really in 3 of the games in terms of carrying the football in relief of Mike Weber, but he acquitted himself very well. Had an 85-yard game against Rutgers with a touchdown, 73 yards against Nebraska, another touchdown against Maryland with 53 yards rushing, carried it 49 times. So that's going to determine, obviously, how much he sees the field and how he's utilized, whether they make the option to get Damario McCall in that H-back role or strictly as a backup for Mike Weber, taking carries away from Weber.
Yeah, I think he's going to be the one that I watch the most come the spring game and heading into fall practice, because nobody really knows what they're going to do with him because he's not that traditional pass catcher. Curtis Samuel wasn't either when he came in, but Curtis Samuel had the luxury of when he got there, he was a running back. He played his freshman year as a running back. His sophomore year, he was full-time wide receiver. Junior year, he was able to merge both of those. McCall's kind of skipping that second year where he gets to learn the wide receiver spot. So that's why I know everyone's excited about him being the new Curtis Samuel, and I'm just still a little bit hesitant on it just because I haven't seen him out there lined up at wide receiver and running routes, and that's why the coaches get paid the big bucks. But I would truly expect this year him not being a full-on H-back like we saw with Curtis Samuel last year. I think you're going to see a lot more of maybe a platoon type of thing where KJ Hill's in on passing situations where if it's first, second down, you're going to see more of McCall and Weber kind of sharing the load. But, you know, realistically, it would be two sophomores running the ball, and I don't know how much Urban Meyer is going to be on board with, you know, two sophomores leading the way for you. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think McCall is the one that I really want to see from the offense on how he expands going into fall practice and into the season. Because outside of Mike Weber, your only other running back besides McCall that is ready for gameplay really is Antonio Williams, who was a true freshman last year. So you're looking at three sophomores and then a true freshman, and J.K. Dobbins are their only options as their running backs back there. So how much are they going to want to move McCall out to wide receiver and go with Weber and Williams and J.K. Dobbins as their only backs back there? So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, Dobbins is an elite talent. He's the second-rated running back in the country by most services coming out of Texas, a top 5 player out of that state, regardless of position. McCall only caught 4 passes last year, so he's extremely unproven in regards to it. And there's so much more in terms of the scheme and where to line up and where the play's coming from than just catching the football. But just looking at how many receptions did he have last year, he only had 4 catches last year out of the backfield. Mike Weber caught 23. Obviously, he's going to be utilized as a tailback, and that's all he is. But for a guy that had as good a year as Mike Weber, you do make an interesting point about him still needing to prove himself coming into this season. The last time we saw him on the field, we didn't see him much actually carrying the football, and 2 of those times he laid it on the turf.
Yeah.
And Urban Meyer, not a real big fan of that, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much as everyone wanted Weber to touch the ball against Clemson, he wasn't really helping his case to keep those carries coming. So how much is that going to weigh going forward? I really don't think Weber's in any fear of losing his job going into next year. But if he goes into spring practice and fall ball and he keeps fumbling, which I don't think he will, I think that was just a one-time thing. We didn't see that too much during the year. But if it's one of those yip type things where he keeps on doing it, then you're going to have to see someone like McCall step up, or Williams really make that leap, or J.K. Dobbins go out there as a true freshman. Anything to not have it be JT Barrett carrying the ball 25 times a game, which I don't know if any Buckeye fan really wants to see that too much. It happens way too much.
The running back position at Ohio State, one of the premier glamour positions in all of college football. The Buckeyes hope that Mike Weber turns out to be more than just a serviceable running back who's going to get yards, no question about that, behind a decent offensive line and with all the talent around him. They need him to be a breakout star and to give them more than he did as a freshman, but still an encouraging freshman season, almost 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. Brandon Zimmerman of the Buckeye Battle Cry and myself, each and every Wednesday night, breaking down Buckeye football and getting you set for spring practice in Columbus. Brandon, we appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks for having me, Mark.